Let's take a second to imagine the unimaginable and the unthinkable. Imagine that you randomly start to feel sick and under the weather, so you go to get checked out by your doctor, and after multiple tests, you're told that you have been tested positive for HIV, but you have no idea or any explanation as to how that would have happened. I am so excited to share just a couple of things. First of all, I want to say happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you guys all have a super safe and fun weekend ahead of you. But also, we just hit our first 100 subscribers, as well as hitting our first video to reach 1,000 views. So thank you guys for all my new subscribers and for everyone that has continued to support me. It means so much to me. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also, head to my Instagram and follow me there as well. But we have a very shocking case ahead of us. I found this case super interesting, so grab your wine and let's get into it. Janice Trahan began having an affair with Dr. Richard Schmidt, who was a highly respected Lafayette gastroenterologist around 1984 while Janice worked under him as a hospital nurse. At the time that the affair started, they both were married, and the affair lasted for more than a decade. During this affair, Janice had actually become pregnant multiple times, mainly due to the fact that Richard was highly against the both of them using any form of contraception, which also included Janice taking any form of birth control. So ultimately, that led to Janice having multiple abortions, and that would be 3 to be exact, in which she said that Richard had pressured her into having those abortions. After aborting 3 children, she finally decided she was not going to abort the 4th child, so she and Richard had 1 son together in March of 1991, in which he paid child support. Throughout this affair, Janice really believed that they were going to end up committing to each other and ultimately getting married, so Janice ended up divorcing her husband. But even though Richard promised over and over again that he was going to divorce his wife and they were going to get married, he never did. And finally, Janice had enough and decided to officially end their affair on July 19 of 1994 when Janice learned Richard had returned to his wife. Prior to this, Janice had tried to end the affair multiple times over the years, but Richard would persuade her into returning each time. So this is where things get quite interesting. So apparently Janice, although she had officially broke off their 10-year off and on again affair, she was still seeing him, but strictly just for medical care, which I find that to be very interesting, but okay. So she primarily sees him because I guess she frequently struggled with fatigueness and lethargy, so she had been getting vitamin B12 shots from him, which is actually an essential water-soluble vitamin that helps people who suffer from anemia or chronic fatigueness. So, on the night of August 4th, 1994, Dr. Richard Schmidt called Tracy and told her that he would be coming over to her house and giving her her vitamin B12 shot, which, if I'm correct, it was around 11 o'clock at night when he had come over, and Janice had already been in bed with their 3-year-old son, but Richard came over anyways, and Janice had explained to him that she wanted to wait until in the morning to get the shot, but he came around the bed, and before she could even react or even say anything more, he injected her in the arm. Although her previous B12 shots had hurt, she said that the pain was like nothing, like none of the shots he had gave her in the past, and that it was a very, very painful shot that went all the way down her arm. And immediately after giving her the shot, he very suddenly said that he had to go to the emergency room at the hospital for a work emergency. This shot in her arm had been so painful that she tried to call the hospital to speak to Richard, since she knew that he would be there for that work emergency. But when she asked to speak to Dr. Richard, they said he wasn't working there that night. So she paged him, where he did call her back, and she confronted him about lying about working that night, and he told her that he had just been working on the 3rd floor of the hospital instead of where she had tried to call. Janice told him about the pain that she was experiencing from the shot, and he ended up apologizing to her and told her that he would not give her another, quote, shot in the dark. Janice began to suffer from flu-like symptoms in the weeks following that shot in the dark, and she continued to see Richard professionally after August 4th, the night of the shot. And because she had been feeling very under the weather, on August 12th of 1994, Richard ordered her to get blood work done, and Richard said that her blood work had all come back normal except for signs that she just may have a typical viral infection, but that it was nothing to worry about. So here we're going to get into a bit of a timeline of all the doctors that Janice had begun to see, primarily due to different kinds of symptoms she was having. So the first doctor Janice saw other than Richard was Dr. Donner Mazel, who was an optometrist who had treated Janice since 1989, and on her optometry appointment on August 16th, Janice had complained to Dr. Mazel of the pain that she was having in her eyes, fatigueness, and the swelling of her lymph nodes in her head and neck. Following this doctor's appointment, Janice had seen Dr. Robert Martinez on August 29th, who was a neurologist and sleep disorder specialist, where she told him that she was having migraine headaches since July, as well as severe headaches, specifically over the weekend of August 27th and 28th, and he too had noticed she had swollen lymph nodes in her head and neck, and also she complained that her throat was sore, so she had seen Dr. Martinez, who referred her to yet another doctor named Dr. Bradley Chanston, who was an ENT specialist. So at this point, Janice has seen 3 doctors aside from Richard from painful eyes, headaches, and a sore throat filled with blisters. Dr. Chanston, the ENT doctor, immediately ordered a lymph node biopsy on September 16th, and the results indicated a viral infection, and this doctor ended up referring Janice to Dr. Luisa Mesa, who was a cancer specialist, since the ENT doctor felt that cancer could be a possibility. But before Dr. Mesa saw Janice, he actually spoke with Richard, in which Richard told him that he already ran an HIV test on Janice and that the results came back negative. So based off this conversation, Dr. Mesa did not order any HIV tests and noted that the negative test in his report. Now we skip a bit forward where Janice saw her regular dentist, Dr. Neil Bernard, on November 21st, where he actually noticed that her gums were inflamed, her lymph nodes were swollen, and her white blood cell count was elevated. Nothing further came from this, but just that these were things that he had observed. Now we get to the last doctor, and I know, guys, she's been to a ton of doctors and it's kind of a bit hard to follow, but by this point, there was still no explanation of her symptoms, but this last doctor was Dr. Wayne Daigle, who was her regular obstetrician gynecologist, and she went to him just for a regular checkup. She soon found out that she was pregnant again, and it was December 15th of 94, and Dr. Daigle had noticed that Janice had lost weight, suffered malaise, and had other symptoms indicative of a viral infection. She told Dr. Daigle that Richard had already done lab work on her, but Dr. Daigle decided to order new tests, and at first Daigle suspected hepatitis A or B, but as an afterthought he added an HIV test just to be thorough, and on December 20th Dr. Daigle was informed by the testing laboratory that Janice was HIV positive. He waited until after the Christmas and New Year's holidays to tell her that the test results were positive, and upon Janice finding out, she had to make the very hard decision, which she decided to terminate her pregnancy knowing that her baby would also be born HIV positive. Dr. Daigle knew that Richard and Janice had been involved in a 10-year relationship and that sexual intercourse was a common way HIV was spread. Dr. Daigle presumed that Richard was HIV positive also, so he ended up calling Richard, and later that evening, Dr. Daigle had offered to have Richard tested for HIV anonymously through his office, but Richard again declined, saying he saw no reason for an HIV test. Dr. Daigle testified that he also told Richard that the Louisiana State Board of Medical Examiners would eventually be notified that he was potentially HIV positive. However, Richard maintained that he felt no need to be screened for HIV. Dr. Daigle testified that during a telephone conversation, Richard has suggested the possibility that Janice could have been infected with the HIV virus either through her contacts with AIDS patients at work, from her other sexual partners, or from dirty instruments used at the abortion clinics where she underwent abortions. Dr. Daigle responded that since Janice was a heterosexual female and not an intravenous drug abuser, he did not believe she was infected with HIV by the means suggested by Richard, but that she had been infected by sexual intercourse. Janice was also being seen by Dr. Ernest Wong, who was a pulmonologist and of the first physicians in Lafayette to specialize in the treatment of HIV and AIDS. Dr. Wong first saw Janice as a patient on January 23rd of 95, and while taking her history, Janice told him about the suspicious shot that was given to her by Richard in the first week of August of 94, and that Richard also ordered blood work for her in September, and Dr. Wong noted that no HIV test was performed on that blood work. He further testified that Janice was exhibiting the classic symptoms of an HIV infection by September of 94. During this testimony, Dr. Wong also noted that Janice was a regular blood donor and had made a blood donation in April of 94, and according to Dr. Wong, a test of that blood donation was negative for both HIV and Hep C. Based on the phase of the victim's infection, Dr. Wong estimated that Janice had been infected with HIV in the first week of August of 94. So, of course, after being diagnosed with HIV, Janice took all necessary next steps as far as backtracking with past partners she had, where in the court hearing regarding this case, the state called 5 of Janice's former sexual partners as witnesses. The men testified that they were all recently tested for HIV and that the results were negative. Another man who dated her also testified that they had never even had sexual contact. She also backtracked with any potential patients from the hospital that she worked at, but according to Julie Sellers, the infection control coordinator for Lafayette General Hospital, who monitored exposures among employees to infectious diseases such as HIV, said that Janice was not in an exposure-prone job such as surgery, nor was she exposed to HIV patients, and hospital records showed that Janice had no reported incidents of exposure. So now the majority was ruled out for how Janice could have contracted HIV. She finally decided to file a criminal complaint against Dr. Richard Schmidt, aka her ex-lover, regarding the shot in the dark, in which at this point she was very confident it was this shot that Richard must have injected her with HIV positive blood instead of her regular vitamin B12 shot that she was supposed to be receiving. To also support why she believed this, she said that Richard had always shown aggressive and erratic behavior towards her, such as an ex of Janice's testifying that he was threatened by Richard to stop seeing Janice, to Richard threatening Janice by telling her, quote, "If you leave me, I'll fix you. I'll fix you so no man will want you." And he also threatened he'd reveal sexually explicit photos of her and hang them around the hospital, along with threatening her, and actually even trying to, at one point, get the university to revoke her diploma so she couldn't graduate from nursing school by saying that she cheated on her exams. But ultimately, since the school couldn't prove it, they let her graduate with her degree as an RN. After Janice filed a criminal complaint against Richard, Captain James Kraft, a then detective with the Lafayette Police Department, led the investigation into the complaint. He obtained search warrants for Richard's office and home, as well as for a sample of Richard's blood. The search warrants were executed on July 13th of 95 at Richard's office. In a search of Richard's office and medical records, they found a log from the date of the injection. It described blood drawn from a patient with full-blown AIDS. In the same log, there was another entry about blood drawn from a woman who had hepatitis C. And according to Richard's records, blood from neither of those patients had been sent for laboratory analysis. Richard knew that he would have to quickly use the infected patient's blood on Janice for it to work, or rather infect her like he wanted it to, because HIV virus's time period is 12 hours and for Hep C it's about 7 days. Circumstantial evidence supported Janice's accusation, but none of it was enough to lead to a conviction yet. prosecutors had the daunting task of proving her infection came from Richard's patient. At Richard's trial, which started in October of '98, scientists presented research based on a new method called phylogenetic analysis, a technique that had never been used in a U.S. courtroom before this. The researchers were looking for similarities between the two sets of viruses that would suggest that the version in Janice's blood had originated in the AIDS patients under Richard, who provided a blood sample for the analysis. A University of Texas molecular biologist told the court that the germs were, quote, as closely related as viruses from two people could be. There was a 1 in a million chance that Janice's infection could have come from anyone other than Richard's patient. Along with the circumstantial evidence and Janice's accounts of her former flame's erratic behavior, the genetic tests resulted in a verdict of guilty of second-degree attempted murder. Richard's wife stuck right by his side the entire time, fighting for his innocence, and had even tried to say in the trial that her husband was innocent because he was in the house with her all day, that Janice was accusing him of injecting her, but it actually backfired because she said he was with her the whole day except for 20 minutes while she was taking a bath. And although Richard also would say that that wouldn't have even been enough time for him to go to Janice's house, inject her, and then be back home in 20 minutes, the officers actually proved him wrong by testing out the drive, including the time it would have taken to inject Janice, and they made it back in under 20 minutes with even a few minutes to spare. The judge at trial had even said, quote, I have looked everywhere for compelling reasons to exercise leniency in this case. Certainly, the defendant's life is unique among convicted felons. We don't normally see persons of his status in the community, his professional status for sentencing. I have listened to what everyone has said with regard to his good works, and I have no reason to doubt them. But in the final analysis, the punishment must fit the crime. All of the good things that he has done in his life, in my view, cannot tip the balance of the scales in light of the deliberate, cruel, and extremely serious crime that he has committed. She also went on to say, quote, we hold that the evidence presented at trial was sufficient to prove that the defendant, Richard J. Schmidt, committed the attempted second-degree murder of Janice Trahan by injecting her with HIV. Therefore, his conviction is affirmed. So, he was found guilty on October 23, '98 for 50 years in prison, where he served it at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center in St. Gabriel, Louisiana. And he actually just passed away this year on February 12, 2023, at the age of 74. As for Janice, she is still alive and doing well and has her family alongside her and also a new husband.
Trial, because that wasn't revealed in the story.
Jim, what was the defense? Well, you know what?
The defense was that he was at home that night and said that he never left his home, that he was at home. Of course, we had cell phone records showing a phone call he made to her, which she said he did right before he arrived at her home. And so there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that just, tended to prove her story more than his.
And as I recall, there was a 20-minute gap where his wife said, well, he was home all night except for that 20 minutes I was in the bathtub, which I can't be sure about. And also, wasn't there a bit of slut-shaming going on?
A bit. There was a lot of it.
We saw in the opening video just now where he says, oh, she slept around with a lot of men. I'm sure that's not a tactic Mark Eiglarz would have engaged in.
So anyways, guys, I came across this case randomly. I thought it was shocking, to say the least, and interesting. I mean, I think it's a vile thing to do. No pun intended. Let me start over. Anyways, guys, I think this case was extremely interesting. I came across it and I just couldn't wait to share it with you guys because I had never heard about this case, nor have I really ever heard anything even related to this. But I will say there is a potential case that I do want to cover, very eerily similar to this case, so keep an eye out for that, possibly. Otherwise, I love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Have you ever heard about this case, and what do you think about it? Thank you guys for tuning in again to crime and wine. I can't wait to see you guys back here next week. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also, head to my Instagram and follow me there as well. And yeah, thank you guys, and I hope you guys have a blessed week.